Thank you.
Okay, so Namatai Kwekweza is a 21-year-old Zimbabwean activist who is passionate about youth, development, human rights, and peace. She is the director of We Lead Trust in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Namatai.
Thanks very much. Yeah, this is very wonderful to be having been invited to this platform. I feel very, very energized to be speaking after Gift Ostalo Ziziba. Very powerful presentation indeed. And it's really good that I've had to hear him speak, I think about a week ago at the Dumiso Dabengwa Foundation. So hearing him speak again, it's just powerful. Always very powerful to listen to him. And it's great that he spoke because it directly features. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Namatai, go ahead.
Great, awesome. I think the host had accidentally muted me. So yeah, so like I was saying, that it's really great that I got to listen to him again this time around, because his presentation really alludes to some of what I wanted to say. So I recently had a conversation with Pearl. It was about other things, but it led us to a point where we were talking about the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, the Patriotic Bill, as well as the diaspora votes, as well as the Cybersecurity and Data Protection Bill. So those are the things that I am here to talk to you about, because I belong to a space in Zimbabwe called the civil society. So normally, because of the work that I do and the fact that I'm a law student, I'm restricted to talk about these things independent of the political connotation that comes with these things. So you'd really realize that the conversation around the Constitutional Amendment Bill, the Patriotic Bill, Cybersecurity Bill, normally the expectation is that I talk about it from a perspective where you are just being legal, as opposed to discussing the political connotations around such things. But there are very strong political connotations which cannot be ignored. The first thing that I just wanted to say is that everything that Ostalos presented in his presentation is very true. It's very accurate. You will realize that the current system is in an attempt to create a one-party state, making certain decisions and doing certain things that are aimed at disqualifying or crippling any kind of opposition or dissent, be it from the MDC Alliance as well as from the civil society. We understand fully well that the COVID-19 pandemic phase and the lockdown has been used for the consolidation of power for the regime. That's number one. It has also been used to enact certain legislation that are going to sustain the new infrastructure that has been put in place by the regime of Emmerson Mnangagwa. I think it's very important for us to understand that whenever there was a transfer of power in Zimbabwe, particularly we look at the Mugabe era, the next thing that those leaders would then do was to begin to enact certain kinds of legislation and policies that would be able to sustain them in their reign of power. So the first kind of legislation is Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2. I'm not going to discuss all the provisions, but I'm just going to talk about the key provisions in this bill that have the potential to be used against the citizens of Zimbabwe. So one of the things that is being amended in Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 is the clause that deals with the running mate, which is basically the idea that in the 2023 election, from what was said in the Constitution of 2013, the vice president was supposed to be elected as opposed to being appointed. So we were going to phase out the issue of appointing a vice president in favor of the idea of the electorate electing a vice president, which would have meant that the person who had the next number of votes could have been vice president. But now what is happening with the regime is that they want to take that out through the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 before we get to 2023. So you can realize that it is very specific to the election. It is very specific to ensuring that the regime creates a legal system that favors it come election period. Another clause that is being amended in Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 speaks into reducing Parliament's powers to veto international treaties, which means that the executive arm of government can now get into international conventions, agreements with as little and minimum interference and oversight from Parliament as well as the public. That means that if they're going to get the country into an arrangement, into deals, into agreements that have fiscal implications, it is going to come out of the taxpayers' money. And yet this amendment is being made with as minimum public input as possible. Another aspect that is being amended is with regards to the issue of judges. So two things are happening. They are taking away the opportunity for public interviews in which we as citizens would give our own opinions of the people who are being made judges, particularly in the Supreme Court, constitutional courts, and at that level. What is going to happen once this happens is that the executive will have a lot of power over the judiciary. And that means that in cases where the executive is an interested party, say for an example, an election dispute, the judges would have been appointed by the executive with no public interview. So a lot of people have given the arguments that it doesn't really matter because all along the executive was just doing whatever it wants. But we have to understand that in the grand scheme of things, it is again taking away power from the citizens, emphasizing power on the executive and compromising the balance that should always exist between the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative arm of government. So these are some of the highlights that are in the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, as well as the procedural aspects of the bill to say how the bill was being introduced. It was introduced during the time of a lockdown and imminent pandemic, in which the nation was supposed to be focusing on the public health crisis instead of amending the constitution, because the people could not participate because they were focusing on the issues that they were encountering because of the lockdown and the COVID-19 pandemic. After that, when there were public interviews, a lot of people could not attend these public interviews because of the roadblocks, because of the state of emergency, which impeded a lot of people from accessing the venues where they were supposed to give their input. When the report for the public hearings was produced by Parliament, we realized that less than 2,000 people in the whole country participated in the process of the public interviews of Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 during the lockdown. And yet they want to amend a constitution that was enacted after the participation of about 3.3 million Zimbabweans with a 94.6% vote yes in 2013. So it becomes very controversial to say this is a very exclusionary process that is littered with exclusionary tactics and also an effort to take advantage of COVID-19 to ensure that they are getting their way while the citizens are busy with trying to survive the pandemic as well as the economic impact that has been caused by the pandemic. The final thing is that in the report that was produced after the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, we also learned that the majority of the participants in those processes rejected the bill. They say they don't want the bill. And yet Parliament then said that they are going to overlook that and still proceed with the amendment process. And the reasons that were given by the Portfolio Committee on Justice, as well as the Minister of Justice, Ziyambe, were that the people who attended these hearings were coached. They were coached by the MDCA and also by civil society groups so that they would reject the bill. And yet when we asked them to substantiate that claim, they could not substantiate it, but they said they are going to overlook it based upon that particular speculation. So that is all with regards to Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2. Another issue of concern is the Patriotic Bill, which was introduced again during the COVID-19 era. And I think this one has a greater bearing on the diaspora community. So the Patriotic Bill was introduced, and basically the regime has given the assertion that they have introduced it because of the Logan Act that is there in the United States, which is about 220 years old. And basically this Logan Act was introduced more than 2 centuries ago because of a man named Logan, who during the time when America was still becoming a nation, went out to solicit funds from foreign states. And the Americans took that treason and therefore enacted and resources or getting foreigners to enter. The thing about the Logan Act is that in America, for the past 220 years, it has never been used for a conviction. It has never been used to prosecute anyone. It has never been used for a conviction. Which makes it a very docile act. And the patriotic bill has been proposed by the Zimbabwe Peace and Reconciliation Commission. And basically, if you read through civil society groups, human rights monitoring groups from here Zimbabwe, it is also going to be used to take away the ability of the citizens to reach out to the external world for help. That having been said, we also have to understand that
Mr. Jams?
Hello, I'm back online. Can I continue?
Yes, please.
Yes. So I was just finishing up on the patriotic bill to say that this bill again was proposed in the time when there is a lockdown. There was minimum public input. The conversation has been restricted to civil society groups, but it's not reaching grassroots. It's not reaching the people. And it has a huge bearing on the democratic discourse that is going to be unfolding in Zimbabwe, particularly as we are entering the election phase. Another bill that is of concern, I'm not going to touch much on that, is the Cybersecurity and Data Protection Bill. All of these bills, if you look at it, have been proposed during the lockdown, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and they have been propelled at a time when people are excluded from participating and being fully conscientized to participate fully in the processes to which this bill is actually going to become law. So this is the situation at hand. And in as much as we can explain it from a legal perspective, we also have to be in a position where we understand the political intricacies around these particular bills and also what they mean as we move forward and as we are reaching the 2023 elections. And it's very important for citizens, both here in Zimbabwe and also in the diaspora, to mobilize around being able to fully resist or at least influence the contents of these bills, just in case they do come into law and they are effected as we approach the 2023 elections. Now, apart from these bills, like what Ostellos has said, in 2020, we witnessed the recalling of MPs. We witnessed the weaponization of the judiciary system through judicial persecutions, in which now there was this new dynamic whereby if someone was arrested, it was very difficult to secure bail, which then led to prolonged pre-trial incarcerations, which are a violation of the constitutional rights of the people who would have been incarcerated. We saw such individuals as Alan Moyo spending about 72 days locked up in prison before trial, and this is very unconstitutional. We've also seen the systematic violence, the terror, the abductions, the rapes, the abuse of citizens, all disguised under enforcing lockdown measures. So that having been said, I won't repeat what Ostellos said, and with the impending bills that are coming into place that are going to be put into legislation, it is very important that people come together and actively resist some of the provisions in the. So the host is muting me by accident, I presume. So I'm not quite sure where I'd left off, but I'll just continue rounding up to say that,
yes,
moving forward.
Namatai, possibly if you can maybe round up in less than 2 minutes, then you can round up if that's okay. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm almost done. So that having been said, it's important for us to be in a position where we understand that we as the citizens have to mobilize, raise awareness, and resist this abuse. So what I had discussed priorly with some of the individuals here locally, as well as some of the people in the diaspora community, was to enact a petition, as well as to produce position papers that we will submit to the Ministry of Justice. And this petition has to be an online petition that speaks into the things that are being rejected. And these encapsulate the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, the Patriotic Bill, as well as discussing a little bit on the diaspora vote, as well as aspects of the Cybersecurity and Data Protection Bill. The purposes of this, particularly the petition, is to have a huge number of people being involved in resisting these bills, so that when the petition is submitted to the Ministry of Justice and to the Portfolio Committee on Justice, they're not just going to ask, hey, it's just Namatai and a few other people, or it's just this organization and that organization. They're always going to ask, where are the numbers? Who else is resisting? And particularly, if we are able to develop a petition online that can be signed by at least 10,000 people plus, it would have a very huge bearing in the context of resistance.